It was the beginning of the school year in 2002 when there was a string of kidnappings in my area. I lived in a small town and nothing like that had ever happened there, so it was big news that had all of the parents on edge. I was a freshman in high school, and I'll never forget arguing with my parents over whether or not I should be able to hang out at the lake with my friends. We ended up agreeing that I could go out after school as long as I was home before it was dark. And even though that only left me with about an hour to hang out, I took it. Tensions started to loosen up about a month after the second kidnapping happened when there hadn't been any sign of the vehicle that the police suspected in the area, and I made the mistake of getting loose with my curfew. It was after school on a Friday, and I knew that I was supposed to be home by 4:30, but the guys and I lost track of time as we were skating. My friend Dan and I just figured out how to throw a kickflip while moving, so we were pretty hyped, and spent about an extra hour playing a few games of skate because of it. And by the time we were done, the sun had gone down. I knew that I was going to be in trouble when I got home, but I figured that it wasn't that big of a deal, so I just shrugged it off as I told Dan I'd see him tomorrow and started cruising home. I made it a little bit down the street and toward my house when I saw headlights that were coming up from behind me. I pulled my skateboard more to the side of the road but continued cruising. I expected the car to just drive by me, but I started getting nervous when I noticed it slowing down a bit. I looked over to my left as it slowly pulled past me and came to a stop. I tried not to freak out as I looked at the SUV and realized that it was the same sort of car that my mom had told me to be on the lookout for. I thought about skating past the car, but then I figured that I didn't want them to get behind me if it was the person who had kidnapped those two kids over the summer, so I skidded my board to stop. I kept my eyes locked on the car, and I noticed the windows starting to roll down. I knew that something was wrong, so I started to pick up my board just in case. I started to take a step backward as a head leaned out the window and looked back at me. I couldn't quite see what they looked like, but at first, I thought it was a woman because of the long hair. But as soon as they talked, I realized it was a guy. He called back toward me and asked if I needed a ride anywhere. I continued to step backward as I replied, "Nah, man, I'm good, thank you." I hoped that he would leave it right there and maybe the car would just continue driving. But as soon as I saw the door opening, I knew that I needed to run. I let out a loud scream to let anyone that may have been nearby know that something was wrong, and I started running in the opposite direction as fast as I could. I could hear the sound of footsteps behind me as the long-haired man was chasing me down, and judging by the sound, I could tell that he was getting closer and closer to me. That was when I looked down at my skateboard and decided that I needed to use it or lose it. I knew I couldn't move faster than him on the board since it was slightly uphill, so instead I turned around slightly and threw the board back at the man who was chasing me and continued running. I heard him grunt as I hit him, and I started yelling again as I ran faster than I ever had in my entire life. That was when I saw them. Coming around the bend up ahead, I noticed another pair of headlights coming toward me. I started waving my hands and screaming out for help as the car got closer, and thankfully, it was one of my classmates' parents that knew me from school. They stopped right away and unlocked their car so that I could get in. And when they asked me what was wrong, I went to point at the man who was chasing me, but he had already started running back to his car. I told my friend's parents what happened, and they drove me back to my house and waited for me to call the police so that they could talk to them and tell them what they saw. The police took both of our statements, and we described the car that we saw. Sadly, they weren't able to track it down, and that was the last time anyone saw it in that area. No one was kidnapped from the town since then, but it's horrifying to think that man is probably still out there somewhere. Not much went on in our small town throughout the year, so whenever the annual Harvest Festival and Parade came around, everyone in the area would get involved. It was a really fun event that involved a lot of the small businesses making small floats and walking through the town square, followed by a fun bonfire for everyone to enjoy themselves at. But ever since that incident in '09, things have never been the same. The day started out like it did every year, with the crowd slowly filling the streets, slowly followed by the floats that everyone made. And I'll never forget how excited my little brother was to see his picture on the local pizzeria float for winning a contest. He never got to see it though. It was about 15 minutes into the parade when I looked to my right and saw a hooded man that I didn't recognize pushing his way through the crowd. It caught my attention because he was starting to make a commotion. That was when the gunshots started to ring out. The crowd practically fell to the floor as everyone started to duck down. It sounded like some sort of automatic, but over the sounds of everyone screaming, it was hard to tell. Everyone in the crowd started to disperse as the gunshots continued, but in the panic, everyone started running into each other without even realizing it, and I was caught right in the middle. It was like I was caught between two waves as both sides of people crashed into me. I tried to scream, but the impact of everyone running into me caused the wind to be knocked out of me. I couldn't catch my breath, but thankfully there was a brief second where it seemed like everyone had shifted direction and started running the same way, and I managed to start moving with the crowd. I looked around for my little brother to make sure that he was all right, and I saw he had made it over to my mom and dad, who were all running in the same direction as me. As I ran, I could hear the sound of gunshots, but none of them scared me like the sound I heard when a bullet whizzed past me and the group of people I was with. It must have been right over my head because I swear I heard the sound of it whizzing right by. We all screamed as we continued running and looking around us for shelter, and eventually I managed to find a storefront that hadn't been locked yet. I made my way inside along with another group of people from the crowd, including my family, and we locked the door behind us and all hid in the back of the store as the sound of gunshots continued for the next few minutes. It took almost 10 minutes for the police to arrive and stop the shooter, and sadly, that was after he had already shot more than 17 people, 3 of which didn't make it. Everyone in the store was fine since the shooter seemed to not come down this way, but that was a horror that our town had never faced before. We ended up not having another harvest festival or parade for 3 years after that. The tradition ended up making a comeback, but every year I swear you can still feel the tension in the air as everyone fears it might happen again. I was 14 years old when the people in my small town started talking about the strange shadows that they started seeing in the woods. No one could accurately describe what they were seeing, but it was clear that everyone was seeing something. Some adults started saying that they would see something staring at them from the woods when they were waiting at the stop signs, and others said that they heard things while they were walking their dogs in the morning. No one knew what it was, and it seemed like no one was really taking it seriously. I know I wasn't, and that was a big mistake and led to the scariest moment of my young life. It was the beginning of the summer, and I was out riding my bike with a few of my friends. We were riding around town, and then as the sun went down, we started riding around the back streets underneath a few street lights that lined the road. We had done it a million times, but for some reason, that night felt different. All of us seemed a little bit on edge, but no one knew why, so we tried not to let it bother us. That changed though as we were riding in this one area of the road that had a weird bump on the side of it that we used as a super small jump. We were riding in a circle, taking turns hitting the jump one by one, when all of a sudden our friend Cody stopped in his tracks. We all had to stop behind him, so when we complained and went to yell at him, we noticed that his eyes were locked onto the woods. Goosebumps came over me before I even looked toward the woods, and as soon as I did, I realized why. We all froze in place as we noticed multiple sets of eyes staring back at us from the woods. It was like we couldn't move, and none of us said a word as we all stared at the eyes. I tried to figure out what I was looking at, but I couldn't tell because their eyes seemed to be about the same height as ours. But something about whatever it was didn't seem like it was human. It had to be though. That's the only conclusion we could draw. Then again, we never got a really good look at them. You see, we sat there for a minute just staring at the eyes from the woods, but once we realized that they were starting to walk toward us, my friends and I knew that we had to run. We all started pedaling our bikes as fast as we could down the road and away from the creatures that were watching us from the woods. But for some reason, it felt like we weren't getting away from them. I kept looking over my shoulder to see if they were following us, but for a second there was no sign of them. I honestly thought that we were all losing our minds for a minute, as if we had all just hallucinated the same thing. But before writing off what we had just seen, I decided to look back to where we were just hanging out one last time. I almost fell off my bike that time as I saw what looked like 2 or 3 people standing in the middle of the road where we were just hitting the jump on our bikes. My eyes were glued to the shadowy figure standing in the road, and I tried to make out who or what they were, but I was riding too fast. And because I had been looking behind me for so long, I almost lost control of my bike and ended up running into one of my friends. We both almost fell, but managed to recover as we quickly rode away from that spot as fast as we could. As soon as we were close enough to our houses, we all scattered in different directions and went inside for the rest of the night. Throughout the rest of the summer, we would hear people talking about the strange shadows or weird people in the woods, but no one could figure out exactly what was going on. Thankfully, that was my last run-in with whatever or whoever they were, but it definitely changed the way we all treated the rest of the summer. From that day on, we all made sure to be home before nightfall, and we tried our best to stay close to our houses simply out of fear for whatever was in the woods. I don't know what they wanted that night, but I know that they were focused on us, and had we not seen them, we might have been in some serious trouble.